I'm going to start by talking about the top 10 challenges that pastors, Protestant pastors, reported last year. And so Dr. Ransom mentioned being the president of the Great Commission Research Network. That's a good group to be a part of. People like Gary McIntosh, Ed Stetzer are all part of that. And so they did some data a little over a year ago. And in the data, they found a couple of things. These were the top 10 challenges that pastors reported facing. Number one, effectively evangelizing people who had never visited their church. Number two, mobilizing for evangelism. Retaining young adults, getting members to put their faith into practice, and then running high-quality programs, effectively evangelizing people through outreach activities and so forth. Now, if you go through and if you look at the article, and by the way, if you indicate on your card, would you send me that article? I'll send this to you tonight. But if you read the article, it comes down to evangelism, it comes down to training the next generation and keeping young people. Those are the top three concerns of Protestant pastors in the United States, the top three clusters. Now, that's nice. Those are Protestant pastors, your Methodist pastor, your SBC pastor. What do Free Will Baptists think? And so Free Will Baptists were in the survey enough that we could break out what Free Will Baptists thought. Their number one concern was effectively evangelizing people who've never visited their church. So just like all other Protestant pastors, Free Will Baptist pastors remained the same. A little bit different. Number two, retaining young adults. Number three, mobilizing for evangelism. And then they talk about finding high-quality pastoral candidates. That was our number four concern. So we were far more concerned about that than other Protestant groups, although it was in their top 10. And so you look at how Free Will Baptists are different from other Protestant pastors, and those are some of the things you see. The other things you see is the three big takeaways. All of the Free Will Baptist pastors were male. The second big thing was the church size. Free Will Baptist churches were smaller, usually between 51 and 100, whereas the other Protestant churches were between 101 to 200. And the third, which is a concern to us, is Free Will Baptist church pastors reported significantly slower growth than other Protestant pastors in the United States. And so there are differences between Protestant pastors and Free Will Baptist pastors and Protestant churches and Free Will Baptist churches. Notice these are 19 things that Free Will Baptist pastors were significantly more concerned about than other Protestant pastors in the United States. Number one concern for us, significantly more than others, was finding high-quality pastoral candidates. And so right now, we have 209 churches that do not have a pastor. We have been up to as high as 220. That's 10.04% of our churches don't have a pastor right now. So that's why we do the shepherding initiative, the pastor placement program, and those things. So it's a concern for all Protestant pastors. It's a problem for all Protestant churches, but it's a significantly bigger deal for us. Why is that? Because we're smaller. We are significantly smaller than the SBC, than the Methodist, and so forth. But there's another reason we believe that that's the case. We are the second most rural denomination or religious group in the United States. The only group that's more rural than us are the Amish, and you probably can't see that, but it's on the bottom. So if you see some Amish folks, you say, ha ha, we're more urban than you are. And so that is a reason that we struggle sometimes to find pastors, is because we don't have, some of our churches are in places where there's not a lot of people there, number one. Number two, we also struggle to find volunteers. All Protestant churches struggle with that, but it's significantly more than us. And that's because the communities that we're in, this over here all the way to the right, that's what's called a CBSA, outside community-based statistical area. That means there's less than 10,000 people in those particular areas. And so we've got some highly rural churches. Now, before you're like, well, we don't need those churches, I'll remind you, the U.S. government, Health and Human Services Secretary, those folks have reached out and said, these people are losing their hospitals, these people don't even have a Walmart. Please don't let them lose their church. Imagine that when your government, who has seemingly oppressed us a little bit, is kind of saying, don't close that church because it's significant to that community. They can't lose that. So that's why we've got some of the challenges that we have. And that seems kind of bad. But you also need to know that we're considered the third youngest denomination in America. This is a different data set. It's the Cooperative Election Survey. They look at a lot of different data. It's actually housed on the Harvard University website. It's something that's been done or conducted for the last 60 years. So we're considered the third youngest denomination in America. There's three different variables they use on that. The one you see on the screen is we have parents or a guardian of a child under the age of 18. We beat the non-denoms. We beat the Southern Baptists. We beat everybody but two different charismatic groups. And it's not a race, but what it means is we have more youth in our churches than others. Sam Rayner was at our convention last week, and he's like, my goodness, I just wanted to be here and I wanted to see it for myself. How is it that you're the third youngest denomination in America? And he said, I saw it since I walked in the door. I see all the young people. And we get that too from the cities where we have conventions at. So, yes, we struggle a bit more than other groups in finding pastors and finding volunteers, but we got a lot of youth. Now, a lot of people are trying to figure out why is that? Part of it is because of the rural nature that people will tend to stay there, and you do see the generations passing in the rural areas. The only thing we can really pick up is our own data. We have studied our Generation Z, the only data set we have. Kids or young people between the ages of 17 and 27 who did Truth and Peace, E-Team, College Missions Program, or CTS. That's our only data set of Generation Z. We studied these people, and 99.25% of them are regular church attenders. That is highly unusual for Generation Z. 87% of them are involved in church ministry. Most of them were doing 3 things or more in their church. They're running the AV. They're on the praise team. They're doing a D group or teaching in children's church. 85% of Generation Z was going to a Free Will Baptist church. And you got to realize these are all now, all the way up to the age of 27. So they've gone to college, they've moved off. And so 15% don't go to a Free Will Baptist church, and some of them will make it clear there isn't one. There's not one where I go. But they still chose doctrine, and they looked at outreach when they were choosing their church. That is probably why we're considered the third youngest denomination in America, because we're keeping more of our kids. I think it's the D6 stuff and all of that. It truly is working. Now, there is something to look at in the CES. So in the CES in 2010, 37% of our folks said that they were a parent or guardian of someone under the age of 18. Now, 28% of them said that in the 2022 administration of the CES. That shows you that we're losing young people. And by the way, not a single Protestant group beat 30. Nobody had over 30. So we had 37% in 2010. So the United States church is in decline. We're just not as rapid a decline as the rest of them. We're holding more of our young people than they're holding. But it does show you that the American church and even Free Will Baptist churches are in need of revitalization, if you will. Let's go back to that top concern that Free Will Baptist pastors had, and that was effectively evangelizing people who've never visited the church. And I'm going to ask you, if you would, to turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 9. And I've got a Bible here somewhere, and here it is right here. 1 Corinthians chapter 9. As you turn there, I'm going to talk to you about something that I encourage you to do. You heard Dr. Ransom mention the people moving. This is the Great Commission Research Network. So we did a podcast with the writers of, it's the Great Dechurching. We did a podcast with the authors of the Great Dechurching, and they said, I am shocked that the number one overall reason that people dropped out of church was they moved. 15.5% of the United States population stopped attending church in the last 25 years. So we, as evangelicals, have said we want to do something about it, and this is our approach. We're trying to boost our directory. So I ask you right now to make sure your churches have a picture in our directory. So now, like the SBC or the Great Commission or the Great Dechurching was written by 2 Presbyterian pastors. And so they go to our website, our directory, and they say, Eddie, you don't have anything there. The churches don't have a website. The churches don't have an inviting video, and so we want to change that. Make sure your church has a picture. Make sure your church has a short description, 3 sentences or less, and an accurate website. And we've given a sample video that we think would be good to help people to know this is a church for my people to go to. You should know that evangelical leaders have looked at this situation, and what we're trying to get our pastors and churches to think about is when someone moves, they belong to you until they join another church. And so somebody goes off and they move to Chicago, they're yours until they become another church. We believe spiritually they're your responsibility. And so you work with them, help them find a church, and we've got a podcast out there on that with David Poteet and Danny Kahn, where we talked about how they made the transition. Somebody moved from Florida to Chicago, and we think that's the process to use. They're yours spiritually, we believe, until they find another church. And so we've agreed to that. I've agreed to that. I said we'll try to do that as Free Will Baptists. The SBC has agreed to that, and our Presbyterian brothers. And so let's do this as part of that to try to help out. Look at 1 Corinthians chapter 9, if you will, and scroll down and look at verse 19. Paul writes, "For though I be free from all men, yet I have made myself servant unto all that I might gain the more." And so what we're saying is we serve. And so we could say that somebody's moved away from us, they're not our responsibility anymore. That's not the attitude Paul had. He was a servant. Look at verse 20. "Unto the Jews I became as a Jew, that I might gain the Jews. To them that are under the law, as under the law, that I might gain them that are under the law." So the second thing we have is we have people moving to our communities. And we've got that here on the screen. You can see the dark green are the places that people are moving to. The dark blue are the places that people are moving from, and then the kind of grayish are just equal. So what is our responsibility? Our responsibility is when people come into our area, it is to reach them with the gospel of Jesus Christ. Look at verse 21. "To them that are without the law is without the law, being not without the law to God, but under the law to Christ, that I might gain them that are without the law." Later today, I'm going to talk about reaching the LGBTQ plus community, if you will. And so what he's saying here is, I put myself in the shoes of people without the law. I put myself in the shoes of those people to try to reach them with the gospel. Verse 22, "To the weak I became as weak." That's what we talked about last night. Depressed or anxious person. "I am made all things," verse 22, middle part, "for all men, that I might by all means save some. And I do this for the gospel's sake, that I might be partaker thereof with you." And so last night we looked at how we're to know ye not, that ye which run in a race run all, but one receiveth the prize, so run that you may obtain it. And that's where he talks about thinking about what you eat, thinking about how you prepare. And for us, we have to think about what we do so that we can reach these people that are coming to our particular communities. And so let's think about that. We've got a tool, and you could actually sign up for it by going to this QR code. However, some of you have already put on your cards that you've turned into me, "I want to learn more about Know Your Community." And so when you did that, we're going to send you a link when I get back and say, here's how you can learn far more than Eddie's going to talk about in these next few minutes. But Know Your Community is a way of fulfilling, we believe, the second greatest commandment. You're called and I'm called to love our neighbors ourselves. If I'm going to love my neighbor, I've got to know my neighbor. And so we use this tool as a means of getting to know our neighbors, their needs, and the various situations. And so we stress to every Christian to know how many people live within a 15-minute drive of your church. And so from this spot, we're talking about 25,406 people. That is your Jerusalem. Those are the people that we're responsible to reach with the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so we also want to know how our neighborhood's trending. Your neighborhood right here is trending up. 73% of all counties in the United States are in decline. That means deaths are outnumbering migration and birth. So when you see this, you are an anomaly. And this is for such a time as this, that people are coming to your community. It's easier to reach people that are coming into your community than people that are more stable. They've already made a change in movement and so forth. And so we're looking and thinking, this is an opportunity for us. What kinds of things do they need? And so we mentioned last night that there's 3,049 people within a 15-minute drive here that are divorced. And so you want to know that for your own community, because that's a need that I can use and I can minister to these particular folks. Now, I could come to this church tomorrow. I just might do that. But anyway, if I come to this church tomorrow, I am going to expect to see some older people. And everybody says we want to reach younger people, and we should reach younger people. But if you'll look here on this dotted line, that's the United States Census. That's what's in the U.S. What we see for this particular community is there are fewer younger people in this community than are in most of the United States. What we do see is when we get to the ages of 50 and up, that it starts going up. And so there's a lot of older people in this community. And I don't know if you can see this, but look at this right here. 85 plus, and look at how it is significantly higher than the United States population. So I would expect to see some gray hair and some no hair when I come in here tomorrow, because that's what's all over the community. If I were to go to Ace Hardware, I'm going to see some gray hairs and some no hairs. And so you got to remind people of that. Well, where's the young people? Well, we got some young people. We've got some young people. But if we're going to reach this community, we're going to have some older people. And we're going to have a lot of older people, because there's more older people in this community than there is younger people. Okay? So we want to do that. The other thing I want you to note is the number one demographic group in this community are females ages 60 to 64. And so we go back, you look at your church, whatever it is, what do females 60 to 64 need? A lot of times they're recently retired, sometimes they're at least recently widowed, sometimes they're struggling with their adult children or grandchildren or whatever. And so I'm trying to reach their needs to do what I can to reach them with the gospel. Notice in this community here, there's a lot of healthy eating. 51% say they're going to try to. Now notice they're not all succeeding, only 12% completely agree. But I know I can use that as a conversation piece. I know that I can use that almost as an outreach piece, because that's what is on people's minds in this community. Notice over here, the exercising, agree completely. 30% of this population is really exercising. If I put the next one, agree somewhat, wow. There's a lot of activity in this community. So that means if I want to walk on one of these trails, if I want to get into swimming or maybe even the gym, that's a place I can reach people and meet people that don't know Christ. And so that's me getting to know them and trying to find out their needs and trying to reach them with the gospel. What are the needs of your population? So look at this. And the blue is showing you it's significantly higher than the U.S. So for some reason, there's a significant number of people making between $15,000 and $25,000. And so, Daryl, I'm hoping it's Montreat Anderson, or you've either it's the college, or I know you've also got very close to here. I don't know if it's close enough, but like JEC, Juvenile Evaluation Center, used to be here. The hospital, we had a state hospital here. Wherever they resided at the point of when the census was taken, that's in that data set. So there are some people that are in a lower income thing, but that's okay, because you can reach them with Backpack for Buddies, and I know you guys are doing something like that at Hickory with your shoes. Those interventions have legs, if you will, because there's needs that way. But you've got a lot of resources here in the community. Notice you're overperforming all the way up to $100,000, and so you can use that to minister to other people. Whatever it is, you look at what you have in your community, although I will say it seems to be easier to reach people of lower income, but it is harder to build a church with lower income folks, right? So you need resources, you need a combination of the two. You just use what you've got. This is the biggie. 16,006 people don't go to any kind of religious service. They don't go to Jehovah's Witness, they don't go to a mosque, they don't go to Catholic Mass, they don't go to a church. The harvest fields are white. Now notice on the right, Your biggest number, and it doubles your agree completely with going to religious service, 44% never go to anything. They never go to anything. They don't go to a Christmas Eve service. They don't go to Easter. And we put those two together. And so I'm telling my people, you feel free to invite somebody to church because they may tell you they're going. Don't tell them they're lying, but they are. 1 out of 2 of them is not going to anything, okay? So don't you worry about inviting them. Now, you've got a fair number of liberals in this community, 14 plus 8. You probably didn't know that, I'm picking. But you've also got a good number of conservatives, right? So the conservatives, that's the largest group that's sliding away from church. That's the new nuns, right? They're red, we may think of them. They're MAGA, we may think of them, but they don't bother going to church and they don't go to church. One of the things you can use on them is, you see this community right here? Those folks on the bottom are going to be the ones that influence this community unless you and your family get in church. The only group who's not changed their opinion on same-sex marriage are weekly church attenders. And by the way, we want them to go to a conservative church, but it doesn't matter. The more they go to church, the more conservative they are, okay? So this community is not going to look like this in 10 years if people don't start going to church. So you use that as an angle on folks. You want your kid to think same-sex marriage is wrong. You want your kid to think it wasn't good what that boxer did, that female Italian boxer the other day. You better get them in church or they're not going to view things the same way. That's where discipleship happens, and that's where we see the only people who haven't changed their opinion are weekly church attenders. And so we've got to get these folks into church. We encourage everybody to take their church and do a SWOT analysis. What are the strengths of our church? What are the weaknesses of our church? What are the opportunities that we have, and what are the threats to our church? And right here is a good data point. What are we going to see in the next 5 years, and based on what the census predicts? And so we look at that data and we plan. So if we do an Awana program or a Good News Club, are we likely to have the kids that we need to be able to support that? We kind of look at that. This community wants to use older people. Even though you don't have as many younger people, you've got enough. And so you use your older people to work with younger people. And by the way, it makes them live longer and it helps them to keep their reasoning longer. We say morbidity and mortality. They're more active. The more active they are in church, the longer they live and the more capable they are as they go on with their lives. What are they like? What are they like? Well, they're white. And I kind of look around and I see a bunch of white people here. So that's what we see in this community. Now you have to be careful. Somebody goes off to UNC Asheville, or maybe more likely UNC Chapel Hill, and they come back and they're like, our church is not very diverse. Show them this right here. That's because our community is not very diverse. So we may have a lot of liberals and all of that. We may be diverse on opinions with politics, but we're not diverse in ethnicity. Now, what it does mean is you've got some black folks or Hispanic folks, they will very possibly come to your church because there isn't a black church per se, and if you're welcoming to them, you can get them because where else can we go, right? They're going to end up going to pretty much white church. And this is what is projected. It's expected to say pretty much the same as we come along. Now, I mentioned last night how I study those communication cards, right, when I was a pastor. And one of the things I did when somebody moved to our community, and we had a lot of people coming from the Northeast and the Midwest, Chicago area and all that. So I wanted to figure out where they came from and what it was like where they came from. And so I was studying things called psychographics, and I found this first there at the UNC Chapel Hill website. So I was working with the UNC system and all that, and I would try to figure out what the community was like, where they came from, and based on that, would I have an entry to try to reach them, to try to get to know them a little bit better. And so we study psychographics in the Know Your Community report. And so, for example, the psychographics here is your number one group is a group called the Great Outdoors. And so if I'm going to reach this community or you're going to reach your community, you've got to know that particular psychographic group well and use that as an angle to reach them with the gospel. And so you may say, what is the great outdoors? What does that mean? Well, this describes them, and I know you can read that very clearly, so I'm going to summarize it. They like the outdoors. They like to garden. They like to walk. And by the way, they do a pretty decent job of managing their money and all the rest of it. And so if I look at it, it's 20% of this entire population. It's 4,340 people. I got to reach them. I've just got to find a way to reach them. And so I'm going to keep going if I'm you or whatever your groups are. I'm going to learn as much as I can about them. And I'm going to look at this chart, which I know you can't see, but it breaks them down into the kinds of jobs they usually do. It breaks them down into ethnic groups and so forth. And what I say is, if you're trying to reach black people, don't worry so much about saying, I'm going to reach black people. Reach the great outdoors, and then you've got your same people. They tend to cross psychographically, so you'll have white people, you have Hispanic people, you have black people all in there. And so I reach them all in similar ways, even though they may look different. And this is where you can kind of see, when we do the Know Your Community results with you, what I've got and how I might be able to go after them. You can't see this, but I've put a mark there that says they love their dogs and they love their cats. And so if you want an entryway into these people, what kind of dog is that? How old is your dog? I had a dog just like that. And you've got them. You've got a conversation with them. And so we try to teach people to write folks' names down, try to pray for them every day, try to get to know them and talk to them about their dogs and their cats. Nonchalant, but you're just kind of working with them. You're trying to get with them, trying to reach them. If you can't see this, but they also like to hike, they also like to hunt, and some of them like to boat. And so if you are a hiker, or you have land, or you have a boat, invite them along. And those are people, you use that as you try to disciple them in the Christian faith and to reach them with the gospel of Jesus Christ. So you ask yourself, as you look at your church, of each of the groups that are high in your community, who do you have that's like that? How did you reach them? Because whatever you did to reach them will reach the others. And who do you know that's like this? And how might you use that or leverage that to reach them with the gospel? It's interesting how they live. This group here, notice them all the way over here in California. Notice them up in the Northeast and all around the Appalachian Trail and in Florida. And so a lot of times you'll find the church will have more in common with the church outside of their state. These are the churches that you have this particular group with. They're in Arkansas. There's Bethel and Kinston. They're in Florida, the 24/7 where Chad Kivett was at, the church plant near Sevierville. So you begin to see the other churches in other places that have a lot in common with you. And what we'll do is we'll even match you up with people that you have the most in common with. And so we see this here. This church has most in common with Homer's Chapel in North Carolina, but then a Florida church, Ryanwood, where Randy Bryant was at, our clerk. And so you go through and you look at those things and you're just trying to reach them with the gospel of Christ. Now, the other thing we do with every church that's done the Know Your Community report, which costs us $100, we will give you a new mover list. And so I've got that for you, Daryl. Don't let me forget to send it to you tonight. But you can see who's moved in your community in the last 6 weeks. And we'll run that for you throughout the year. We'll run it for you like Christmas Eve. You won't invite them to church, or Easter, or VBS. And so again, remember, that's a good outlet. We encourage, and we'll talk more about this if you watch our Facebook material and so forth in the fall, how to have a ministry to try to reach people that are new to your community. But real quickly, you can know who they are, you can know where they are, and you can have their mailing list, and you can go after them. 69% of all Free Will Baptist churches who have done the Know Your Community feedback report can identify things they have done to reach their community. And Tom Rainer has said that we are the best users, he thinks the best users of the Know Your Community report of any particular group. And that's what that quote is, so somebody don't like Tom Rainer or PowerPoint doesn't like him or something. The other thing I'm going to say to you is, If you have a college within a 10-minute drive of your church, I want to encourage you to think about reaching them. We have an Reaching International College Students Task Force, right? And so again, put that on the back of your card. I want to know more about that. We've got a whole series of podcasts. We have a whole team. 2 of them are from North Carolina. Buddy, our guy is, what's his name? He's from the Fuquay Verena Church. I'll think of it, Bradley Mercer. And his wife is also from the Peace Church. And so they will help you reach international students if you want to. By the way, all you have to do is give them time. You don't have to be cool or any of the rest of it. Invite them over for Thanksgiving dinner. They have nowhere to go over the holidays because they can't go back to China or wherever they're from. They're kind of stuck here. So that's the Know Your Community report if you're interested in using that. Now, I'm going to take these and pass them around. You can have as many of these as you want. But we encourage you to take your church and to have them to all identify people they're trying to reach with the gospel of Jesus Christ. They're all trying to train people or disciple people in the faith. And they've all gone through and thought, what are my gifts? So if I'm a hunter, if I'm a hiker, I try to take that and I try to use that with the gospel. So they're in their mindset of who is it I'm reaching, who is it I'm training, and what is it that I've been given? And they do that. I think you all here at this church have already gone through Chuck Lawless's book, The Bubble. If you use that first QR code, there's a link where you can download the book for free. There's also a PowerPoint and a handout. We encourage churches to go through this. You can give the book to anybody you want to give it to, but it's just a way for them to think about trying to apply some of this material to their own lives to reach people with the gospel. And he starts it out, he says, look, name 10 people that you know that don't know Christ. And we want to expand that number, and we want to look at how we can reach those 10 people and so forth. And so we think about that. Second thing, big concern our people mentioned was that they were having trouble mobilizing for evangelism. We know we need to reach people with the gospel, but we can't kind of get the congregation out there moving to do that. So we're going to suggest something to you called the Hope Initiative. And you could go to nafwb.org/hope and you can sign up for that. I believe with our discount, I believe it costs $148. And always remember, the Free Will Baptist discount will be the cheapest rate that you can get these particular resources. But you say, what is the Hope Initiative? It's an initiative that's used to change the culture of a church. And so we've gotten into a point where I don't like it, it's too hot, or I didn't like that we had this and not that at the church. We're trying to get people to not be inward focused, but to be outward focused. And what we found is only 4% of churches in America have any type of evangelistic outreach, only systematic evangelistic outreach. Only 1% of churches in America have a year-round evangelistic outreach. And so the Hope Initiative is something you do all year long. The idea is that it's not burdensome. It will take a person less than 20 minutes a day. They read something and they do something for 30 days in a row, and it takes them less than 20 minutes. And it's something the pastor would need to lead and participate in. It brings hope. It changes the culture. It's a game changer, if you will. And so all you do is you ask 3 to 5 people, or 3 to 8, would you be interested in participating in the Hope Initiative? 3 people say they would, and the pastor does as well. Then you just need 2 more. Don't be upset if everybody doesn't do it. Somebody doesn't want to do it, no problem. We'll get you later. But 3 to 5 do it, and the church prays for the 3 to 5 or 3 to 8 as they do it, and they hear about what they're doing, and that begins to change the culture. I want to do that. Well, you can do it with us next month. We'll sign you up for it, and you can do it at that point. Now, what do they do? And they're going to study in these 30 days 12 times or 6 passages related to evangelism. They're going to pray 12 times evangelistically in 30 days. They will make 65 evangelistic touch points, primarily praying in front of people's houses in these 30 days. So this is what the pastor does. They send a text and they get this as part of the kit. Day 1, welcome to the Hope Initiative. And so for all 30 days, the pastor sends out a text. We encourage the pastor to send it out at the same time every day. And by the way, even Sunday. even Sunday. So every day during the 30 days, they send out this text. One of the big components of the Hope Initiative is writing notes. And so as part of the kit, you get notes. So like a new resident or a guest at your church or an educator or a community leader or a local merchant or an employer or a non-believing friend or a neighbor. People often are not used to getting notes that thank them for being, a restaurant owner or a mayor. And so this has been a transformative thing for many of our communities as these people receive the notes and they've been able to respond. We do the medical professionals, first responders, and so again, the people read something, they do something, but you give them these sample notes where they can put it in their own words and do it as they see fit. Now, let's just say in your church, let's say in September 30 people do it. Let's say in November 30 people do it. Let's say in January 30 people do it. And by the way, we found it works a little better to have a little bit of break, right? But if you do that and you have 30 people in all do it, they'll pray 360 evangelistic prayers, 180 passages, and they'll do almost 2,000 non-threatening touch points during the course of that year. That changes the culture of a church. It just changes it into something different. And the goal is that as different people, as these 3 to 5 do it, and we pray for them, and then later these 3 to 5 do it, and then these 3 to 5 do it. And by the way, these 3 to 5 did it, and they're done. They don't have to do it again. But what tends to happen is it sticks with them. And they pray a little bit better for these 3 to 5 as they're doing it. And it just cycles through and it just seems to really work. You got to remember, less than 1% of churches in America have a year-round evangelistic ministry. So this is a year-round thing, which is why we think it changes the culture and so forth. So we helped develop this. We had 12 churches that participated in the beta group. And so one of our guys said it's very doable for a Christian at basically any level of maturity or understanding. And so it really does work, is what this particular pastor said. The other thing is the very first church we had to do this, and so this pastor, Noah Taylor, and I think he's been here, he started reading it through on December, and then he was getting his church to start it in January. This guy gets saved. He's in the middle here. He gets saved. He starts coming to the church based on a note. Noah sent him a note. Unbeknownst to Noah, his girlfriend had broken up to him. He came to church. He started coming every weekly. He starts going to a life group. He gets saved. I want to say it was in February or so. He gets saved. He gets baptized. He has a Good Friday service. That's what this picture is, with non-believers and his new believing friends. He gets baptized about a week or so after Easter, and voila, the rest is history. And so we've seen great results. This is a Kansas pastor. One of the people in his church says we've been Christians for 30 years, and we've done more evangelism in the past 30 days than we had done in the past 30 years. This is Jeff Silver, a North Carolina pastor. He says they started last August, 1 year ago right now. We did 2 more groups, one in October and January, so you see how the spacing worked for them. It's changed our church. We've seen 12 saved, 7 families added to our church. To God be the glory. So this has been a great thing, just a really great thing for us, and not just us, for a lot of folks. The Global Methodists, you probably know, one of their groups, every church in the district did the Hope Initiative. So these things really work. One of our Southern Baptist friends, one of their states, they have 5,200 churches in that state. Every one of them bought Know Your Community. So these things really do make a difference, and really a lot of times they're looking at kind of things we've done, and they're doing that. You know Rekindle. I think Brother Randy's one of our coaches, and so if you're interested in Rekindle, you could go to this. You could also put it there on your particular card, and I would send you this link. And you say, what is Rekindle? And so it's really serious coaching. It revolves around these 10 areas here. We go through and they do an assessment there of your church, and the facilities and all the rest of it, kind of like Brother Brad was talking about. We ask the members themselves to do a church assessment. And by looking at the church assessment, they look at whether they're Bible-centered, whether they have healthy relationships, outward focus, purposeful prayer, authentic worship, deliberate discipleship, stewardship, and leadership. And they use that for the coach and the pastor and the church team to come together and work on strategies to try to address deficits and then to try to enhance some of the things that are already good. Every church that we have worked with has focused on evangelism. That's the first thing that they have kind of picked up on. But sometimes it's facilities. Sometimes it's like those are some low-hanging fruit that can help them in some of those areas. But anyway, it's a nice way for folks to come together and work. Our suggestion to churches is start with Know Your Community. That feedback session, I'll give you and I'll say, this is a good intervention for you. Sometimes it's First Aid Ready. Sometimes it's the bubble. Based on the makeup of your community, we're talking about this. Almost always we're suggesting after Know Your Community that they turn around, they do the Hope Initiative. And then after they do the Hope Initiative, they may want to go further and do Rekindle. It's up to them. But the point is there's a lot of resources that are available to our churches and they can use them any way they want.